Thank you for the organizers of the seminar to invite me. This is my first visit to this august institution, and I have a delightful time here. Thank you. I feel honored that I have in the audience such figures as Ambassador Ranganathan and also my seniors, and that I am talking to them. If I had just 1 minute to speak, I would say this much, that the Russian strategy in the Asia-Pacific is full of ambivalences, and it's useful for India to remember this. It's unlike the strategy that is being pursued, very unlike the strategy that is being pursued by other countries which are as much engaged with that region. The great Russian author Dostoevsky said once, in Europe we were Tatars, but in Asia we too are Europeans. He said this year was 1881. 132 years have passed, but essentially things have not changed from the Russian perspective. The fact is, as Ukraine shows, still the Russians are not part of the common European home, and they are caught between Europe and a rising China. This just about sums up their predicament. Of course, today's context has changed totally. China's growing power, but also South Korea's lesser rise, changes the balance insofar as it makes Asia look like a potential model of development for Russia. Secondly, the Asian paradigm in Russia's national identity framework has therefore been deeply modified. Russia wishes to continue to be an indispensable player on the key Asian questions for reasons of its identity as a great power. It no longer wants to be marginalized from international discussions on the Korean question and asked to remain a partner to Chinese influence, but is also relevant to a possible Japan-South Korea alliance. Thirdly, the stakes are also heavily economic, and Russia happens to be in a position of dependency on the Asian markets. Moscow is eyeing the Asian oil and gas market with greater interest than ever before and hopes to counterbalance its tense relations with Europe and the impact of the shale revolution by exporting new supplies to Asia. Fourthly, the APR, the Asia-Pacific region strategy, is directly linked to the development of Siberia and the Russian Far East. Economic factors naturally become paramount here. While it is widely believed that Russia will continue to be Europe's primary energy supplier, including natural gas, for the near future, its best days are certainly behind. As this transition occurs, Russian producers are attempting to turn to Asian consumers to lock in a limited number of longer-term supply deals. Now here comes China. Asian gas demand growth will be primarily led by China, which remains the fastest growing economy with a 12% annual growth rate. The Russia-China relationship is currently strong, and both sides recently inked a preliminary deal to double Russian crude exports to China. The two countries also seek to foster closer energy links between their state-owned companies. Thus, Putin gradually has pivoted to Asia, both politically and economically. And Russia hopes to expand energy and trade ties not just with China, but also more broadly with Asia, with Japan in particular. Therefore, despite the mounting ferocity of Sino-Japanese rhetoric, China's partner Russia is moving forward on normalizing its ties with Japan. However, in an overarching sense, in the first circle of Russian strategies comes another thought, that is the global strategic balance. This is unlike any other countries like India or European countries. This is extremely important for Russian strategy, global strategic balance, because this still, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, becomes the trump card for Russia to play an effective role on the global stage. From the Russian perspective, there is a centrality, therefore, to the US, Russia, China strategic equations in the APR. How does Russia see the strategic balance in APR? I will outline 9 Russian postulates. 1. The starting point is to note that the security environment has deteriorated in the Asia-Pacific region over the past 2 years. 2. The relations between the 3 powers are both complex and diverse. 3. The military strategic relations between Beijing, Moscow, and Washington are deeply asymmetrical. 4. At its root, the strategic relationship between the US and Russia is about parity in nuclear forces, with a long history of nuclear arms reduction. 5. By contrast, China's relations with Russia and the US both are highly ambiguous and certainly not linked to nuclear parity. 6. The US retains overwhelming nuclear superiority over China, though acknowledging the latter's right to nuclear deterrence. China's intercontinental ballistic missiles are vulnerable to a US first strike. 7. For Washington, the center of gravity has shifted in nuclear deterrence toward the Asia-Pacific region. 8. The evidence of the US shift, this shift towards the Asia-Pacific region, is the presence of 8 out of 14 US ballistic missile submarines today being present in the Pacific Ocean. 9. The current impasse over missile defense system reflects the internal political character in both states, US and Russia, and these issues will not change the overall military balance in the next 10 to 15 years. These are the basic Russian postulates on strategic balance in the Asia-Pacific. However, Ukraine changes a great deal. US-Russian relations have reached their lowest point since the Cold War ended. There is a sense of crisis in Russia's relations with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So my conclusion in the immediate term, these fissures in Russia-US NATO relations have a risk of playing out in the Asia-Pacific region. However, this is only a small part of the story. In a medium-term perspective still, the future of US-Russia nuclear arms reductions is tied to the China factor. China has, from the Russian point of view, China has around 50 ICBMs that could target Russia's European territory, and 3 times more that may reach its Far East and Siberia. In sum, therefore, Russia, there is no silver bullet for Russia. In these terms, Russia wants China to become part of the arms control process and hopes it will work to Russia, that China's entry will work to Moscow's advantage. Russia hopes that in exchange for China opening information about its potential and limit its strategic weapons and intermediate and shorter range missiles, the US will have to stop further expansion of missile defense systems in the Pacific. As Russian strategic thinkers view it, the current US missile defense system and those of Washington's allies in the Asia-Pacific region, such as Japan, will not be able to parry China, but will only spur the Chinese nuclear power capacity. This gives impetus to the Russian wish to bring in China. In sum, there is no silver bullet for Russia in its relations with the Asia-Pacific region, and the country must in the long term diversify its relations in the region. But the partners Russia needs are more interested in commerce than politics. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Canada, and so on. That is to say, Asia-Pacific region has emerged as a matter of regional development for Russia, national security, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Russia in the first half of the 21st century. All in all, at a strategic level, Moscow faces a dilemma. On the one hand, it realizes that it needs to continue to seek ways to challenge US, European Union, and NATO policy in one theater, that is Europe and Ukraine as we see it today, while on the other hand, increasingly it senses that the longer-term conflicts of interest will lie in the Asia-Pacific region. In this shifting strategic and economic context, the Russian elite perceptions of the Chinese neighbor is full of contrasts. Divergent viewpoints on the Russian side are explained by various elements, including different political and ideological traditions and the paradoxical relationship to the West and Asia. Since he came back to the presidency in May 2012, Putin has praised the Russia-China partnership, both countries has identical views on the international scene and a successful economic and strategic partnership. However, Russia's attitude toward China has to be also understood through its silences or in counterpoint. Therefore, since the revival strategies of the past decade, the Kremlin has implemented an offensive policy of multilateralism also, which involves China. The main objective for Moscow is thus to benefit from Asian economic dynamism without jeopardizing its national unity. In conclusion, today, in the backdrop of the European developments, we also need to factor in two things. One, the Kremlin's critical stance on the West has an ambiguous meaning. Two, Moscow does not say that Russia is not part of Western civilization, but that Russia, as part of this civilization, puts forward another reading of Western identity. It's not very different from what Dostoevsky said. Thank you.